As games become longer, more complicated and more expensive to develop, the spectre of game droughts loom. Nintendo has not been immune to game droughts in the past, and even in the Switch era, there have been many years, notably 2018, 2020 and 2024, where very liberal uses of ports and remakes papered over cracks in their schedule. As PlayStation and Xbox struggle to keep a steady lineup of AAA heavy hitters on their consoles, are Nintendo next? Will the next system receive fewer games? In this video, I want to explore the issue in a little more depth. We'll start by looking at Nintendo's history and what it considers a healthy or unhealthy cadence of releases, and some of the varied ways it has managed droughts in the past, including particular issues the company has faced in the past when navigating technology jumps, notably with their belated introduction to high-definition games in 2012. We'll then contextualize with other companies to see what kinds of problems are faced by some of the biggest budget games on the market. Finally, we'll look at the current state of a variety of Nintendo development studios and examine to what extent delays could be a problem for the company going forward, and what are some of the solutions they have already proposed to ensure that there is a steady schedule of games going forward. So look, this is not Nintendo's first rodeo. What is their standard rhythm of releasing games? If we look back to the 3DS, the system was criticised for being relatively light on games early on. However, it had 11 different retail releases in its first year, 19 in 2012 and 18 in 2013. The problem is that most of these are not what you would consider to be memorable, fully formed games. Titles like Crossword Plus, Culdcept, or games developed by third parties such as Koei Tecmo's Spirit Camel the Cursed Memoir, or for that matter, Mario and Sonic at the Olympics Games. None of these were probably going to lead to big queues at midnight. 2013's list included 3 games published in Europe that tied into the Oxford Reading Tree's phonics scheme for children. Still, once you factor in a steady pattern of downloadable titles such as Box Boy, Stretchmo, and Dr. Mario, plus the first-party titles, it's possible to see that Nintendo kept the 3DS in at least a dozen games per year, and usually a little more, a pattern that's roughly consistent with the DS and Game Boy Advance days. But home consoles have always been a little trickier. In the Wii's 6-year life cycle, it racked up 53 titles, fewer than 10 per year. Same with the Wii U's 41 retail titles, including third-party team-ups like Mario and Sonic at the Olympics. When you deep dive the actual games, things get even dicier in terms of variety. New Super Luigi U is glorified DLC. Games like Ninja Gaiden 3 and Lego City Undercover are third-party titles Nintendo is just serving as a publisher on, and there are a lot of shorter, casual-focused titles such as Sing Party, Wii Party U, and the NES Remix Pack. Even setting these aside, a number of the games were either intrinsically quite small or arrived undercooked. Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, Star Fox Guard, and Mario Tennis Ultra Smash all falling into one of these categories. There are not many remakes or remasters, however. I count only Wind Waker HD, Twilight Princess HD, and Bayonetta. This was clearly a difficult time for Nintendo. The need to jump to HD gaming led to a slow release schedule at the end of the Wii's life, which in any event was imploding, and the early games of the Wii U were not exactly what you call showstoppers. Nobody can take away from New Super Mario Bros. U its sales resilience. The remake has consistently hovered in and around the top 10 for Switch, but it wasn't a graphical showcase, and as a third sequel to a series that was already a throwback to start with, it was hardly the kind of statement of intent game to launch a new system to hardcore fans, certainly not when you consider other systems launched with Super Mario World, Super Mario 64, Zelda Twilight Princess, and Zelda Breath of the Wild. It's late 2013 and early 2014 before you got a consistent rhythm of impressive-looking titles on the Wii U. Mario Kart, Super Smash Bros., Super Mario 3D World, and by then, of course, the writing was well and truly on the wall. But this doesn't give Nintendo full credit. It was, at the time, juggling not just 2 different consoles, but also a burgeoning mobile game division. 2016 had a reputation for being a drought year, a big waiting game before the Nintendo Switch launch, but it racked up 32 different Nintendo first-party releases, and they kept supporting 3DS until 2019 and continue with mobile titles for a good few years to follow. Whatever capacity Nintendo had, they were tapping during this time. But how did they manage the Switch transition? Did they manage to maintain a steady cadence of games even during a dark period? let's break down the games they put out. 2017 needed to hit big, and indeed it did. Zelda Breath of the Wild was obviously a huge game, as was Super Mario Odyssey. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 just sneaked in during the month of December and seemed to require some late patchwork to tidy it up, but clearly Nintendo were determined that the year of 2017 should have multiple high-impact, grand-scale titles. They also had ARMS, Fire Emblem Warriors, and Splatoon 2, which would have required some substantial development, some slightly smaller-scale games in 1-2-Switch and Snipperclips, a major third-party tie-in with Mario plus Rabbids, Kingdom Battle, and 2 ports, Pokken Tournament and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. They released 2 titles at launch and then at least one every month except for May going forward. With huge quality and consistency, they made 2017 a year that is still considered by many a benchmark for how to do a great system launch, and I do think one of the reasons people are incredibly excited about the new Nintendo console is not just the new technology, or even mainly the new technology, but the promise of another 2017 style year. But they really didn't have the deep bench of games to back it up, and 2018 was, by contrast, a grueling year for anyone who had owned a Wii U previously. The pattern from January 2018 to March 2019, broken only by the holiday quarter, was that they were looking for 4 games per quarter. Doesn't sound too bad until you break down what they are. 2 ports, 1 tentpole release, and 1 casual title. So the big tentpoles were taken care of with Kirby Star Allies in March, Mario Tennis Aces in June, Octopath Traveler in July, and Yoshi's Crafted World in the March of 2019. None of these exactly light the world on fire titles, except, if you're into it, Octopath, which was not even a Nintendo-developed title. Then you had the Bayonetta duology, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, The World Ends With You, which ultimately ended up in October, and New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, which I guess counts as 2 ports if you include the Super Luigi U content. To fill out the schedule, there were 4 separate Labo releases and Fitness Boxing, all covering the casual end of the spectrum. This schedule of remake, 2 ports, and a casual title was so consistent that I simply don't believe it was a coincidence, and I think we could see this pattern again in the twilight months of the Switch. Obviously, the holiday quarter of 2018 had 3 megaton titles in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, and Super Mario Party, which has turned out to have incredible legs for the system. You can tell they decided in 2018 that they would just try and put all their chips on a big holiday season, and they could kind of get away with it because, let's face it, hardly anyone had played the myriad of Wii U ports that they were bringing over, and those games were on similar technology to the Switch, so while the controls needed amending, they didn't need to be radically reconceived for the ports to take place. This was a big stroke of luck, but really, from Xenoblade Chronicles 2 in December 2017 to Super Mario Maker in 2019, the only really significant Nintendo games are in that holiday quarter. It's pretty incredible in retrospect that the Switch was as successful as it was with such an underwhelming lineup during its early months. Of course, 2019 was when they really needed to crank it up because the Switch Lite was releasing, with Koei Tecmo leaping to the rescue to help Intelligent Systems with the jump to HD for Fire Emblem Three Houses and Next Level Games, and Grezzo making their Switch debuts with Luigi's Mansion 3 and Zelda Link's Awakening. This is where the convergence of handheld and home console teams on Switch really started to pay off. It also feels like this is when you started to lose a lot of franchises that Nintendo kind of relied on during the 3DS days, but now no longer require. Art Academy, Steel Diver, Star Savvy and Pushmo all disappeared. In some cases, the studios went out of business, as we saw with Alpha Dream and Vanpool. It might have all seemed like a sunny time on the surface, but clearly, underneath, things were pretty tricky for developers in Nintendo's orbit. And obviously, in retrospect, the major turning point for the Nintendo Switch system was the release of Animal Crossing New Horizons. It's impossible to say how different things would have been were it not for the pandemic. After a big release, Nintendo sometimes likes to luxuriate for a while. They left a 5 or more week gaps after Breath of the Wild, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Tears of the Kingdom and others. And of course, going into 2020, there was not a lot announced, with Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition being the major title being mooted. But just look at the release schedule for the 2020 to 21 financial year as it ended up. A trio of Super Mario ports, a Pikmin 3 port, a Pokemon Mystery Dungeon port, a remake of Xenoblade Chronicles, Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, These were, in the main, higher effort contributions than we were used to in 2018, but they were still mainly ports, and supplemented by a mix of casual titles like Clubhouse Games and Mario Kart Live Home Circuit, alongside micro titles like Pokemon Cafe Mix, Good Job, and Jump Rope Challenge. Look, this was a challenging year across the world, and I'm not criticising Nintendo's 2020 lineup for a second, but I think it's telling they went back to the pattern of one major new title per quarter, or in Xenoblade Chronicles' case, a title so big that it felt new. So they had Xenoblade in the April to June quarter, Paper Mario in July, Hyrule Warriors, Age of Calamity in the holiday quarter, and Bowser's Fury in February of 2021. And since then, remakes and remasters have continued to be a part of the Switch firmament. Mario Party Superstars used recycled levels, Miitopia was a 3DS port, Skyward Sword HD was of course a remaster, Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl were remakes, and Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp was a Game Boy remake, or would have been if it wasn't delayed for a year. Clearly, things have gone back into a higher gear since 2023, with Kirby's Return to Dreamland, Metroid Prime Remastered, Super Mario RPG, Another Code Recollection, Mario vs. Donkey Kong, Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, and Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door. Strip away the casual titles, the ports, the third-party publishing deals, and the smaller games like WarioWare, and if you also discount huge selling but not very feature-rich entries like Switch Sport, if you just focus on core first-party experiences, this is what the last few years looks like. 2021 has Metroid Dread and new Pokemon Snap. 2022 had Bayonetta 3, Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, Mario + Rabbids Sparks of Hope, Pokemon Legends Arceus, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, Splatoon 3, and Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Such a rich lineup that you have to wonder how many of these were originally in the shoot for 2020 to 2021 and became delayed. Then 2023 has the still respectable lineup of Fire Emblem Engage, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, Pikmin 4, and Super Mario Bros. Wonder. I have to say I think 2023 may be one of my favourite years for video games ever. What we're zoning in on is that for the most part, Nintendo wants to have at least 12 games, one per month, even if they're resting on ports, ultra-casual titles, or even Nindies. 2024 might prove an exception to this, of course, but with Endless Ocean Luminous published by Nintendo, there hasn't yet been a particular break in this pattern. They also need to place their major games at the major pinch points in their calendars. The launch of a system, the holiday seasons, the launch of new hardware, which apart from the Nintendo Switch coincided with holidays in 2019 and 2020, but apart from that, Nintendo are willing and able to kind of busk it. The fact that the Switch has relied so heavily on old games and has still been lauded for the strength and diversity of its lineup shows that they can make it work. They didn't behave that differently on the Game Boy Advance or even the DS. They also can usually get together some casual titles which may not make Nintendo's fan community weak at the knees, but often deliver some major sales. Clubhouse Games, Switch Sports, and Ring Fit Adventure are all major titles for them. Okay, that's where Nintendo is and where it has been and how they like to cope with these sorts of transitions. Let's just take a moment to look at what the transition now to 4K gaming and to the larger scales of games we're seeing nowadays will bring. I think it's worth bearing in mind this quote from Hiroshi Yamauchi, the president of the company for over half a century, including its entry into the video game market. I've mentioned this in a separate video, but the quote is so fundamental to Nintendo's philosophy, I do think it bears repeating. There really are just an overwhelming number of people out there that know nothing about the business of games. The game business is a tough one, and it's not been around for that long either, so there are people out there that find this industry incredibly interesting, venture capitalists in particular. That's why these people are pouring money into the field right now. The more amazing graphics and sound you put into a game, the longer it takes to finish. Not just a year, but now more like a year or a year and a half to 2 years. So then your development costs balloon, and when you finally put it out, you have zero guarantee of it selling. That's what the game industry is today. Well, if his comments were prescient then, they still resonate massively today. Sony and Xbox games have been chasing scale at an incredible rate, and the budgets have ballooned to match. Spider-Man 2 cost $300 million, Starfield at least that amount, Hogwarts Legacy $150 million, Horizon Forbidden West $212 million. Nintendo has always been cagey about its budgets, although if you check out this video here, I have gone into Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom's likely budgets in some detail. Shigeru Miyamoto commented at the time that In striking that balance, while it's important that we do not overextend by putting an excessive amount of content into our games, the only solution is to make software that sells well. There will be big hits somewhere in our business, and they support the games that fail and allow us to take on other challenges. So our basic premise is to create software that will sell in the range of at least 2 million units. We simply couldn't recoup our cost if we only released games in Japan that had sales of 300,000 units, so the global market is our standard. Even though many recent games like Pikmin 4 and Luigi's Mansion 3 are the most feature-rich of their series so far, I would expect this trend to continue for another generation at least, and I think the fact that he is conscious about setting a limit means that the company is unlikely to get into the same difficulty with mission creep that seemingly affected other game studios. If you look at Tears of the Kingdom, vast and impressive as it is, it's also very much a budget-conscious game. The open world is reused, a few mechanics were heavily prioritised, but Hidemaru Fujibashi wouldn't give the green light even for dogs to be petted in order to save development resources for where they were needed most. What Nintendo needs to be able to do is to get a good number of major titles out early and then to have a rhythm of at least one significant title per quarter, though this could include Mario Tennis, a 2D Kirby, or other mid-sized games. So, do we believe that Nintendo have such a lineup going into their next console? We know that the new Mario Kart has been cooking for a long time. Despite Tour and the expansion pass, there has been no major retail title from EPT9 since 2017. I've got another video which goes into the specific people and how the development staff is comprised, but suffice to say for now that they clearly have a good deal of staff and they've had a good deal of time. The same is true for the Super Mario Odyssey team. Yes, they had Bowser's Fury and a bit of DLC for Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, but to all intents and purposes it looks like the next Mario title will have had an 8-year development cycle. If Masahiro Sakurai builds off Ultimate rather than starting from scratch, a new Smash Bros. Might not be quite so impossible to see in a relatively short time frame. However, even if it took him a bit longer, and unlike previous systems, Super Smash Bros. Was pushed back a little bit, personally I think the 10th anniversary of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate in 2028 has a decent chance of being the time that they will launch a 10th anniversary edition of the game. If Masahiro Sakurai builds off Ultimate rather than starting from scratch, you could imagine a world where a new Smash Bros. Could be made in a slightly shorter time frame. And let's face it, if the new system doesn't launch until 2025, then 2028, the 10th year anniversary of Smash Bros. Ultimate, while being a little later into the console's life cycle than you would normally expect to see a Smash Bros. Game, would still be a reasonable time frame for a release, especially given it's not a completely new game. Luigi's Mansion 4 is trickier to predict, but since the only next level games title since Luigi's Mansion 3 was the rather feature-poor Mario Strikers Battle League, it stands to reason that by 2026 or 2027, next level games could serve up a new title if the bulk of their team remained with the Green Ghostbusters. I will be looking more at next level games in a separate video in future though. In many ways, Nintendo is still more perfectly set up than most companies to manage, as they have always had a penchant for one big game per console lifecycle, and if they're now able to extend console life cycles to 7 or 8 years, as they've done with the Switch, then so much the better in terms of the development windows. But even once they've cycled through their top-selling franchises, Super Mario of 3D and 2D flavours, Luigi's Mansion, Animal Crossing, Splatoon, Zelda, Switch Sports, Mario Party, plus a goodly selection of Pokemon titles, once the dust settles on it all, they still have such a deep bench of franchises to explore, and they have been progressively making moves to build up development relationships, securing their AA game lineup going forward into the future. Nintendo has such a deep bench of titles, and some have been barely touched from a remake point of view. Super Mario RPG is in the incredibly rare category of Super NES games to receive a remake, which I have to attribute to the Switch Online service being a major selling point of the Switch. We have, to the best of my recollection, yet to see a remake where the original is available to play on the original console, save perhaps Twilight Princess, which was available on Wii, as well as being released on Wii U, and Mario & Luigi Bowser's Inside Story, which is not something that Nintendo will want to repeat, given how much it failed in the final days of the 3DS. Nevertheless, there are so many Super NES games that seem like perfect candidates for remakes. the Donkey Kong Country trilogy, Super Metroid, A Link to the Past, and, if Nintendo really feels like melting down a fandom, Earthbound. However, one last tool in their toolbox is something Shigeru Miyamoto talked about setting in motion 10 years ago. Check out this video on screen for a deep dive into Nintendo's long-standing plans for franchise spin-offs and to engage more and more new studios. As you go, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and I will see you soon for another Nintendo Forecast. Thank you very much.